Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So hope you are doing well. Today we are going to discuss the previous year questions of GATE 2026. So let's start with the compulsory sections from question number 11. So question number 11 is, which one of the following increase over time when the soil is fully saturated? So first of all, this is belongs to our hydrology sections, and in hydrology this question is based on Horton's infiltration theory. So when rainfall begins on a dry soil, the infiltration rate is initially high. Why? Because the soil has abundant empty pore spaces and a strong matrix suction, gradients pulling water downward. As rainfall continuously increasing, the water fills in the pore spaces and the soil profile approaches saturations. So the infiltration capacity progressively decreases and the asymptotically approaches a constant minimum value when which it is not controlled at saturation hydraulic conductivity of the soil. So once the soil is fully saturated, the pore spaces can no longer accommodate additional water. In that case, what happens? The rainfall in the excess of the infiltration capacity, it cannot enter into the ground, and instead of accumulating, it's move across the land surface, which is known as overflow or runoff. As you can see in the figure, the figure shows this is runoff as it is increases when our infiltration rate decreases, which are both are opposite to each other, or we can say inversely proportional to each other. So here the our right answer will be runoff. Let's discuss about the other options, which are our infiltration. As we discuss here, infiltration is the process by which water enters the soil surface and its rate decreases with the time as the soil saturated. The next one is our porosity. So as we all know that porosity is nothing but a ratio of, so we can say that porosity is equal to ratio of void spaces B by V by total volume of a soil or rock. So it is a structural, or we can say the textural property that depends on grain size, sorting, packing and cementation, and it does not change simply because water is added, or filling pore with water does not create new pore spaces. The next one is our permeability. So permeability, it is also an intrinsic property of the porous medium related to the size, shape and interconnectivity of pores. Like porosity, it is essentially a static material property and does not increase merely because the soil becomes saturated with time. So our right answer is runoff. Let's see the another one. Next here it is asked, in which of the following layer inside the earth the velocity of P wave exceed 13 km per second. So as we can see in our earth, there are major three layers. One is core, which is divided into inner core and outer core. Next we have mantle, which is also divided into lower mantle and upper mantle, and crust. So generally P wave velocity inside the earth is governed primarily by the elastic incompressibility, which is known as bulk modulus, which is denoted by K. Our rigidity, mu, represented by shear modulus, and density, which is represented by rho. So we know velocity of P wave is equal to under root K plus 4 by 3 mu by rho. So as depth increases through the solid mantle, the pressure increases continuously, and rising K and rho together in a way that cause velocity of P wave to rise steady with depth, which punctuated by jumps at major mineral phases transition. As you can see here, our transition zone, which is approx here, we can see 410 to 660, and in the lower mantle, after that this 660 kilometer, it suddenly jumps more than 13. This is the line of 13 kilometer per second, and it is more than 13 just near the core mantle boundary. So the correct answer for this question will be our lower mantle, and you can see the other in the upper mantle, which is between 8 to this 11, and again in the core part it is below 12 only. So our correct answer is lower mantle. Next we have, which one of the following is not a volcanic igneous rock? So we can see here in the table that we have volcanic versus plutonic rock, or also we know the igneous rocks are broadly classified by their mode of occurrence or cooling history, which are of two types. First one is our extrusive, which is also known as volcanic, means it crystallizes at or near surface, so it's cool rapidly. So due to rapid cooling, it forms fine grained or glassy. And second one is our intrusive, means it crystallizes slowly at the depth, and due to slow cooling rate it forms coarse grained, which is also known as phaneritic. So here are some example of volcanic versus plutonic rock. So rhyolite, granite, both having same compositions. We can say the granite is a plutonic rock and volcanic equivalent is rhyolite. Syenite, trachyte, granodiorite, dacite, gabbro, basalt, peridotite and comatite. Comatite, we know that it is a ultramafic rock having high MgO content and erupted mostly during the Archean as very hot low viscosity lava flows, and one of the distinct feature is spinifex texture. So here not volcanic rock is our syenite. Next we have, if R1 and R2 represent respectively denote the equatorial and polar radii of a reference ellipsoid, then the radius r of its equivalent sphere is given by. So here the Earth's reference ellipsoid is an oblate asteroid, as you can see in the figure. So generally it's generated by rotating an ellipse about this minor, which is polar axis, and therefore it has two equatorial radii along this surface of revolution about the polar axis. So this R1 here, the R2 is less than R1 because of the Earth's rotational flattening. Now we have R1 and R2. So the volume of ellipsoid is equal to 4 by 3 pi ABC. Here A is equal to B, that is R1. So it will be 4 by 3 pi R1 square and R2, which is equal to the sphere of radius R, which is, so it will be cancelled out, pi cancel out. So R1 square R2 is equal to R cube. So R is equal to under root cube R1 square R2, or simply you can write R1 square R2 whole power 1 by 3. So right answer will be C. Next we have, which of the following sources are used in land seismic survey? So here it is marked as is R, which represent our multiple select questions. So in land seismic survey, the seismic energy source must be one that can be deployed and generate a stable seismic pulse on dry land. So in dry land generally we use vibrosis, dynamite, thumper, which is also known as our wet drop, and this air gun is generally used in marine. So let's discuss the each options one by one. So our vibrosis is a truck mounted vibrator plate that is pressed onto the ground and made to vibrate through a controlled sweeping frequency range. Here you can see this is a truck of vibrosis surveying, and after recorded the data later is cross correlated with the non-sweep to compress it into an equivalent impulse source value. So as it is a car mounted or truck mounted, it is non-explosive, repeatable, and widely used in populated or environmentally sensitive land areas. Second we have dynamite. Dynamite, as its name suggests, it's a explosive. So an explosive charge in place to in a short hole. Here as it is charged few meter below to the surface, and after that it produces a very high energy sharp impulsive seismic wavelet and has traditionally been the standard land source, especially in difficult terrain. Next we have thumper, which is also known as wet drop. A heavy steel weight or plate is mechanically raised up first, we rised up, then dropped. So after dropping, it's generate seismic pulse, which is simply non-explosive impulse land source historically, and it is generally used in our oil and gas exploration. This one. Now the air gun, which is I discussed that it's generally work in marine region. You can see the diagram here. So in air gun, we release burst of very high pressure compressed air into the surrounding water, and then rapidly expanding air bubbles generate the seismic pulse. Like here, it's require a water mediums to operate effectively, and is stored behind a vessel a few meters below to the sea surface. So our right answer will be A, B and D. Next we have from sedimentology, like a pebble has an average diameter of 8 mm. Its phi value on the wooden Wentworth scale is, so generally the Woodenworth grain size scale is a standard logarithmic scale used in sedimentology, as I told you earlier. So to classify sedimentary particles, like we have boulders, cobbles, pebbles, granules, sand, and we have silt and clay at the last. So based on their diameter, it is classified. So to compress the very large range, as it is greater than 264, it is between 264 to 64, 64 to 4, and 4 to 2, like that it is classified. So to compress this very large value of natural grain diameter into convenient linear appreciable scale, this phi scale is given by Krumben, and the formula is for phi is equal to minus log 2 d, where d is our diameter in mm. Okay, so here diameter is given as m, 8, so 8 is represented as 2 to the power 3. So phi is equal to minus log 2 to the power 3. So 3 will be here, and it will be log 2 by 2 as per the, so this value is 1, so our answer will be minus 3. Now next next one is from a structural geology. As a quartz vein in a granitic outcrop has an initial length of 20 cm. If it undergoes uniform stretching resulting in a longitudinal strain of 0.45, the length of vein past deformation is dash centimeter. Okay, so as here you can see the extension is represented as length final, length initial by length initial. So we have given longitudinal strain, which is also known as extensional strain, extensional or longitudinal, which is given as 0.45. Of course it is a unit less, and we have also the initial length L0 is equal to 20 centimeter. We have to calculate the length of the post deformation. So the final length will be our, like, it will be LF by L0 minus 1 is equal to, so LF minus L0 is equal to E plus 1. So L final is equal to 0.45 plus 1 into our initial length, which is 20. So 1.45 into 20 is equal to 29 centimeter, which is our answer. Next we have the which one of the following is correct pair of radioactive parent isotope and the corresponding radiogenic daughter isotope. So here we can see that rubidium 87 and strontium 86, which is not correct. Why? Because rubidium is decaying by emitting a beta particle, beta decay, into strontium 87, not into strontium 86. Actually, this strontium 86 is a non-radiogenic reference isotope. Second one is our samarium 147 to neodymium 143, which is our correct. Third one is our uranium 235 to lead 206. Its breakdown, but not this uranium 235. This uranium 235 breakdown into lead 207 and uranium 238 into decay into lead 206. This got interchanged. So our right answer here is B. In these questions you can remember half-life. Sometimes ask half-life of different this parent isotopes. Now let's discuss the next questions, which is about the volcanogenic massive sulfide deposit. Here it is asked which one of the following pair of geophysical signature most commonly indicates volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits. So as we know that volcanogenic massive sulfide, which is represented by VMS deposit, it is generally formed on or near to the sea floor at submarine volcanics. This magma comes out. The hydrothermal fluid circulated through a feeder, which is fault or cracks, and precipitate metal sulfide on exhalation onto sea floor, building a stratiform or lens-shaped massive sulfide body, which is generally dominated by pyrite, FeS2, pyrrhotite, chalcopyrite, sphalerite, ZnS, galena, which is PBS, and commonly hosted within this felsic mafic bimodal volcanic sequence. So two intrinsic physical properties of this massive sulfide mineral assemblies control its geophysical response. So like it is highly dense with respect to their surrounding rocks like sulfide minerals, pyrite, pyrrhotite, chalcopyrite, galena, lead, having a density greater than 4.6 or 5, but generally the enclosing felsic or mafic rock having density 2.6 to 3 gram per cc, which is less than this massive sulfides. So this density contracts produce a distinct positive, yes you can see here, anomaly directly over the ore body, making gravity surveying. The second thing is low resistivity or high conductivity, because resistivity and conductivity both are inversely proportional to each other. So massive sulfide, especially our pyrite, pyrrhotite, chalcopyrite, these are semi-metallic conductors that permit electron conduction through the interlocking sulfide grain frameworks, and unlike ordinary silicates like which produce our conduct mainly by pore fluid, electrolytes and conduct high. So our answer will be here A. Let's discuss about the other options which are low gravity and high resistivity. So this low gravity and high resistivity, this combination generally expected over a low density and resisted rock unit like felsic intrusion, felsic intrusions, porous or buggy or dry sedimentary units, or a cavity altered rock with two no sulfide contents. So it is the opposite of what we discussed in the option number A. Next we have low gravity and low resistivity. As conductive but low density signature is characteristic feature of our graphitic, or we can say carbonaceous shale schist horizons, or saline groundwater saturated fault shear zones, or clay rich weathered zone. Next we have high gravity and high resistivity. So this dense but resistive signature is instead typical of non-sulfide dense rocks such as banded iron formation and magnetite rich but comparatively resistive unless magnetite content is extreme. Massive oxide bodies with limited grain to grain contact, or dense but essential non-conductive mafic ultramafic rock. So our right answer is A. Next we have from geomorphology, which one of the following is a physical weathering process. So as we know, the weathering process is divided into physical, which is also known as mechanical or chemical and biochemical weathering. So in physical weathering, generally it disintegrates into smaller fragments and without changing its mineral or chemical composition. But in chemical weathering, it's alter the mineral through chemical reactions with water, oxygen and CO2. So here in the options, or also you can table the chemical weatherings are oxidation, hydrolysis, carbonation and dissolution. So carbonations, hydrolysis oxidations. These are example of chemical weathering, and this exfoliation is example of physical or mechanical weathering. So in exfoliation, generally when our deep buried granites or plutonic rocks exposed into the surface by erosion, they came in contact with environment, water, O2, etc. They start reacting and they start weathering. So this confining pressure that once acted on all the sides, the rock expand mostly outward, which is perpendicular to the surface, and fracture into curve, and this sheet-like slabs comes out in the layer of a onion. So this is exactly how classic exfoliation domes, for example granitic domes, form. So here no any new minerals produced and no chemical bonds are broken in this process. Let's little bit discuss about our this processes: oxidation, hydrolysis and carbonation. So in oxidation, as we discussed, it is a chemical process in which iron bearing minerals like olivine, pyroxene and biotite react with atmospheric or dissolved oxygen like Fe2 plus get converted into Fe3 plus, forming iron oxide, hydroxide like hematite, limonite, that gives rock their characteristic rusty brown weathering ring. In hydrolysis, as name suggests, that it reacts with H plus or OH minus ions with silicate minerals, mostly classified the breakdown of feldspar into clay. And its single most important chemical weathering reactions for silicate rocks, which clearly involves a change in mineralogy. Next one is carbonations. So here it is it is a chemical reaction between carbonic acid and dissolved in rainwater and carbonate silicate minerals like CaCO3 react with to form soluble calcium carbonate. So these are our part 1, which cover 11 to 20 questions. In next video we will discuss more about this GATE 2026. So thank you so much. We will meet in the next video.